The grasslands were heavy with heat the day he found her. A lion cub, no bigger than a farm dog, lay trembling in the brittle shade of a thorn tree. Her fur was matted with dust, her sides hollow with hunger, her breath shallow like wind fading from a fire. Vultures circled overhead, waiting for the silence that always came when the wild gave up on one of its own. But this man, walking the edge of the reserve where his cattle grazed, did not turn away. Something in those amber eyes, dim yet pleading, pierced through the layers of caution and fear. He scooped her up, surprised at how light she was, bones sharp beneath skin. She whimpered, but did not resist. Back at his homestead, he placed her in the shade of his veranda, offering her milk warmed in a battered tin and small pieces of meat softened in broth. At first she refused, weak and distrustful. But as the hours passed, she licked, swallowed, and then leaned into the bowl with a desperate hunger that spoke of days without food. The man sat beside her through the night, brushing flies from her coat, whispering words she could not understand, but whose tone carried the weight of safety. Days became weeks, and the cub grew stronger. Her ribs vanished beneath new flesh. Her eyes sharpened, her legs steadied. She played with his boots, tugging at the laces, and chased chickens clumsily across the yard until scolded back. The man built her a pen for safety, but she always managed to crawl out, padding after him with a persistence that made him laugh despite himself. Though he knew lions did not belong in the world of men, he also knew she would have died without him. Somewhere between those truths, a bond was stitched. When she reached the size of a young hound, her instincts began to reveal themselves. She would crouch low in the grass, eyes fixed on goats with a hunter's focus, her tail twitching. He corrected her firmly, guiding her back to scraps of meat he provided. The villagers murmured uneasily. "She will not forget what she is," they warned. "One day the wild will call her back." He knew they were right. And yet, when she curled at his feet at night, breathing deeply, he could not imagine sending her away. Still, the day came when choice was taken from him. Rangers from the reserve, alerted by whispers of a man raising a lion cub, arrived at his door. They spoke sternly but not without compassion. She must return to the wild. To keep her here is to deny her what she is meant to be. His throat tightened, his heart rebelling, but his eyes drifted to the cub, no longer a fragile orphan, but a sleek, growing lioness, her gaze restless at the horizon. He knew it was true. With a heavy heart, he walked with her to the edge of the reserve. She rubbed her head against his chest one last time, her purr vibrating through his bones. He knelt, pressing his forehead to hers, whispering a farewell choked with tears. Then he stepped back. She lingered, looking at him with something deep and wordless, before turning and slipping into the tall grass, vanishing like smoke into the wild. Years rolled forward. The man often wondered what had become of her. Did she survive? Did she claim a pride of her own? Or had the savannah swallowed her as it did so many? He grew older, his cattle grayer, his days slower. Yet always at dusk, he found himself staring toward the horizon, listening for echoes of a roar that might carry her memory. And then, one evening, she returned, but not alone. The sun had just fallen behind the acacias when he heard it, a sound both familiar and strange, rolling deep across the plain. A lion's roar, close enough to rattle the windows of his homestead, yet softened somehow, as if shaped by memory rather than threat. The man froze, heart pounding. For years he had dreamed of her return, half believing, half doubting, and now the air trembled with her voice. He stepped outside, the twilight still warm, cicadas buzzing in the scrub. At first there was only shadow and grass, shifting in the wind. Then she emerged, larger than he ever imagined, her golden coat sleek, muscles rippling under the fading light. Her mane was absent, for she had grown into the full glory of a lioness, not the cub he once held in his arms. Her eyes found him instantly, those amber depths unchanged, pulling him back to the nights when she curled at his feet. But she was not alone. Moving hesitantly behind her were 3 small cubs, their coats dappled with faint spots, their steps unsteady, their eyes wide with the same fragile innocence he had once seen in her. They pressed against her legs, hiding, curious but wary. She nudged them forward with a gentle push of her head, urging them to face the man. He fell to his knees, overcome. Tears blurred his sight as he watched the miracle unfold before him. The lioness, the orphan he had saved, had brought her children to meet him. It was as though she had carried a memory of his kindness through the years, and returned not only to show him she had survived, but to share proof of her new life, her pride, her legacy. She padded closer, slow and deliberate, her cubs trailing behind. When she reached him, she lowered her massive head until it touched his chest, the same gesture she had given him the day he set her free. The rumble of her purr vibrated through him, ancient and powerful. The cubs, emboldened by her calm, sniffed at his boots, their small tails flicking nervously. He reached out with trembling hands, not daring to touch them, but letting the moment wash over him like a blessing. Neighbors had gathered at a distance, their voices hushed, their torches glowing. They watched in disbelief, some crossing themselves, others whispering that this was no ordinary lioness, but a spirit bound by gratitude. Yet the man knew the truth. This was the wild acknowledging love, a bond that had endured beyond separation, beyond time. The lioness stayed with him only briefly. She lingered in the yard, her cubs tumbling over one another as children do, their small growls sharp and playful. The man sat among them, laughter breaking through his tears, until at last she rose. With a final nudge of her muzzle against his shoulder, she turned back to the plains. The cubs followed, glancing back once before vanishing into the tall grass with her. The silence that followed was heavy, but not empty. For in that silence lived proof that what he had given her, a chance, a home, love, had not been forgotten. She had carried it into the wild and returned it in the form of a miracle. Life renewed, trust preserved, a bond unbroken. Word of the lioness's return spread like fire on dry grass. Within days, villagers from neighboring settlements came to hear the tale, some skeptical, others reverent. They gathered at his homestead, leaning on staffs, their children pressed close, waiting for him to speak. He told the story with no embellishment. Of the day he found her broken and near death, of the nights he nursed her with milk and firelight, of the sorrow of letting her go, and the miracle of her return with cubs at her side. His voice trembled, not with pride, but with gratitude. In time, the lioness came again, though never for long. She appeared at the edge of the fields with her cubs, lingering in the twilight while the man sat quietly nearby. She never threatened his cattle, never crossed into harm. Instead, she became a presence, a guardian spirit that stalked the savannah by day and sometimes returned to remind him that their bond still lived. Each visit was brief, like a whisper, but each left behind a sense of wonder so deep that even the most skeptical villagers began to speak of her with awe. The man grew older, his hair silvering, his steps slowing. Yet each evening he sat by the veranda, eyes on the horizon, waiting. Some nights he heard her roar in the distance, rolling across the grasslands, and smiled, knowing it was meant for him. Other nights silence stretched long, and he wondered if her lineage had carried on, if her cubs had grown strong enough to carve their own lives in the wild. When his final years approached, he asked for no monuments, no great speeches. He asked only that, when his time came, he be buried beneath the old thorn tree where he had first found her dying body so many years before. And when that day arrived, the villagers honored his wish. They laid him there, wrapped in silence and earth, while the wind stirred through the grasses. That night, as the moon rose over the savannah, A roar split the darkness, long, low, mournful, yet filled with strength. The villagers swore it came from near the thorn tree, where a great lioness had been seen standing, her form silvered in moonlight, her cubs grown into towering shadows at her side. Whether spirit or flesh, no one could say, but the sound carried deep into their bones, a farewell and a promise all at once. In the years that followed, the story became legend. Parents told their children of the man who saved a lion cub, of the bond that bridged the distance between man and wild. Travelers carried the tale further still, until it became a parable of compassion whispered wherever firelight flickered, and always the story ended the same. When the wild calls, love does not vanish. It waits, it follows, and sometimes, against all odds, it returns with a miracle. In the years after his passing, the story of the man and the lioness grew into something greater than memory. It became a thread woven into the soul of the savannah itself. Travelers who crossed those lands were told, often by firelight, of the bond that had defied nature, a dying cub, saved by human hands, who returned years later with her young as a living miracle. Children leaned forward wide-eyed, their imaginations painting the golden lioness stepping from the grass, her cubs trailing behind like shadows of the past and promises of the future. Elders spoke of the man's compassion not as simple kindness, but as a covenant with the wilderness, a reminder that every life saved ripples outward into eternity. And sometimes, on nights when the wind swept low across the thorn trees, villagers claimed they could hear it still, the deep, resonant roar of a lioness, rolling like thunder over the plains. Some said it was her children, now rulers of their own territories. Others believed it was her, spirit-bound to the place where her story began. But for those who had known the man, it was something more, a sign that love had never left, that it walked still in golden paws over the land. The thorn tree where the man was buried grew thick with blossoms each season, its roots deep and strong. People began leaving offerings there, carved wooden lions, bowls of milk, garlands of grass, not as worship, but as remembrance, for the man who gave and the lioness who returned. And so the legend endured. It was no longer only about one man and one lioness. It became a lesson whispered from parent to child, that compassion is never wasted, that the wild remembers kindness, and that sometimes the bonds we form outlast even our lives. Thus, the tale closes as it always does. Somewhere in the vastness of the savannah, beneath the endless stars, a lioness still walks with the memory of a man in her heart.